I lived a nightmare inside the house, but today I am stronger. I've never told my story to anyone. Not out of shame, but because I always thought no one would believe me. And even if they did, they'd think it was an exaggeration, teenage drama. But there was one day, one specific day that changed everything. It wasn't the end of hell, but it was when I realized that either I reacted or I would end up losing myself forever. That night began like all the others. I went to bed knowing I would only have about 3 hours of sleep. Marcelo always set his alarm for 4 a.m. and would come in with that flashlight shining in my face, yelling that I was lazy, useless, that black people couldn't rest. Sometimes he wouldn't even say it out loud, but it was all in his eyes. My mother, Isabel, pretended not to hear. She said she had an early shift, but I saw her notebooks. She wrote everything down, as if my suffering were part of a clinical trial. And that hurt more than Marcelo's words. Because she was my mother, and yet she let me. Still she saw me, and it was still there by his side. That night I went to bed hungry. It wasn't new. If I messed up during the day, like not cleaning the bathroom properly or being late getting home from school, Marcelo would cut my dinner. And as always, his sons, Tiago and Lucas, ate normally. They were younger, but they had already learned to laugh at me. Sometimes I thought they did it just to please their father. Other times I saw in their eyes that it was genuine fear, that they didn't want to be the next target. I lay down on the thin mattress on the floor of the back room, my stomach churning. The room smelled of mildew and cheap disinfectant. The only window was jammed shut, and I slept fully clothed because I never knew if I'd need to run away. It was like living in a constant state of alert. That night, before closing my eyes, I secretly grabbed my phone and texted my uncle Jorge. I simply wrote, "I can't take it anymore." I didn't ask for direct help, nor did I know what I wanted with it, but it was a scream, a silent plea. And that scream came back to me in a way I didn't expect. 2 hours later, I woke to the sound of the gate slamming shut. I thought it was the wind or some noise from the street. But when I heard heavy footsteps on the porch and then that muffled shout of, "Marcelo, open this door," I knew my uncle had come. I got up so fast my head spun. I ran to the living room, but Marcelo was already there, his face red, his body swollen with rage. He yelled at me to go back to my room. I froze. All I remember was feeling my leg tremble. Jorge knocked on the door again and said he wouldn't leave until he saw me. Marcelo looked at my mother, who appeared from the hallway with her lab coat half open and a look of confusion. It was at that moment that I realized that day was going to be different, because for the first time, someone was there for me. Someone had come. Jorge forced his way in when my mother unlocked the door. He wasn't angry. He had a pain in his eyes I'd never seen before. And when he saw me, with the deep circles under my eyes and my thin body, he just said, "Is this really what's happening here?" My mother tried to say something like, "It's not like that, Jorge," or "You don't understand the situation." But he wouldn't hear of it. He walked in, walked past me, and went straight to Marcelo. They spoke quietly at first, but then it exploded. Marcelo started yelling that Jorge had no authority, that this was his house, that he took care of me as best he could. Jorge said that wasn't care, it was torture. I'd never seen an adult stand up to Marcelo like that. My mother stood between them, begging them to stop. I just stood there, feeling my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my throat. The boys, Tiago and Lucas, were on the stairs, watching everything, and it seemed like they didn't know whether to root for their father or be afraid of what was going to happen. I wanted to hide, to disappear, but I also wanted to scream, to say everything that had been bottled up inside me for years. But it wouldn't come out. I just trembled. Until Jorge turned to me and said, "Do you want to leave here today? Because if you do, I'll take you right now." That was like an explosion in my head. It was the first time anyone had given me a choice, a way out. But it was also the hardest moment, because to leave I would have to say, out loud, that it was all real, that I was being abused, that my mother knew, that my stepfather was a monster, and that tore me apart inside. I stared at my mother. She lowered her eyes. She said nothing, and that was worse than if she had yelled at me. Jorge held out his hand. I went, trembling, crying, but I went. Marcelo still tried to stop me. He said I would regret it, that it was just a phase. But Jorge had already called the police, and when the two police officers arrived, he told them everything. He talked about my condition, the messages I'd sent, the history of assaults, and even though the officers were cold and somewhat skeptical, they didn't stop me from leaving. They let me go with Jorge. I left that house with a small backpack on my back, my cell phone hidden in my pocket, and the certainty that nothing would be the same after that. The first night at my uncle's house was strange. There were no screams, no flashlight shone in my face. But I also couldn't sleep. The silence felt too heavy. I lay on the couch, listening to every creak of the wood, every car passing by on the street. My body still awaited the slap, the scolding, the demands. Nusa, Jorge's girlfriend, brought me a blanket and a cup of warm milk. I wanted to thank her, but all I could do was cry. She sat beside me and said nothing. She just stayed there, and that was more comfort than any words. The next day, I started telling her everything, little by little. Telling her about my mother's notebook, about the recordings I made in secret, about the day Marcelo locked me out of the house because I arrived 3 minutes late. Jorge heard everything, and he started putting together a dossier. Noza also helped, with the evidence she'd been gathering for months. I discovered she already suspected a lot and had already spoken to a lawyer. That's when I realized I was no longer alone, that I had people on my side now. But it wasn't easy. Marcelo started a campaign against me. He used social media, his military friends, his neighbors. He said I was rebellious, ungrateful, that I was being manipulated by Jorge because of a long-standing family feud. He knew how to play. He knew how to pretend, and many people believed him. I saw comments online calling my mother a victim of her son's rebellion. They said she was a strong woman who held together a difficult home. And there I was, trying to breathe, trying to exist. We filed a lawsuit. Jorge used everything he had. The messages, the audio recordings, the school records, the sick days, but nothing seemed enough. Marcelo was well connected. The lawyer said the case would take time. And during that time, I couldn't go back to school without being seen as the boy who accused his heroic stepfather. I started to feel guilty, even though I knew I was right. I started to wonder if maybe I really was the problem. But then Jorge took me to a support group. I saw boys like me, boys who had been through worse. And that made me stop wanting to disappear. It was in this group that I met Rafael. He was 16, like me, and his story was as heavy as mine, but he spoke calmly, as if he'd already been through the hardest part. One day, after the meeting, he said to me, "You're still in the middle of the hurricane, but the day will come when you'll look back and see that you've emerged from it." I never forgot that. I clung to that phrase like someone clinging to a lifebuoy in the middle of the sea. I started writing, not to post, nor to report. I wrote just for myself. I put down on paper everything I couldn't say, the anger, the shame, the desire to disappear. And little by little, I began to understand myself. I began to see that I wasn't weak for crying, nor for being afraid. Weak were those who used power to destroy. I started therapy too, with the help of an NGO. And for the first time in my life, someone told me that everything I felt was valid, that I wasn't exaggerating, that what I experienced was real, that it hurt, but that I could get out of this. The real turning point came on a day I didn't expect. I was going with Jorge and Noza to a preliminary hearing for the case. Marcelo was there, in a suit, clean-shaven, with his children by his side and my mother silent. I saw in her eyes that she still loved me, but I also saw that she was afraid. afraid of everything she would lose if she stood against him. The judge listened to our stories, saw some of the evidence, but in the end it was decided that the case could be resolved with a plea bargain. Marcelo would be charged with excessive discipline and would serve community service. That was it. At that moment, I wanted to break everything. What do you mean? Everything I'd lived through, and he was going to walk out of there as if he'd just given me a harsh scolding. But Nusa grabbed my arm and whispered, "You're already out of there. He's not in charge of you anymore." And that was the second it hit me. I was free, still wounded, still scarred, but free. He would never yell at me at 4 a.m. again. Never again would he erase me from existence to feed his ego. After that day, a lot changed. Not magically. I didn't wake up cured, nor ready to move on as if nothing had happened. But it was the first time I felt the weight on my shoulders lift a little. I started sleeping better. I woke up at the time my body asked, without shock or fear. Sometimes I still had nightmares, but at least I woke up and knew it was a dream. Jorge's house became my base. He helped me return to school in a different unit, far from the old neighborhood. At first, I thought everyone would judge me. But little by little, I realized that no one there knew my story, and that gave me some relief. I could start over. Little by little, I started gaining weight again, eating properly, taking a leisurely shower, small things, but things I hadn't done before. Nusa always reminded me that the healing process wasn't linear. There were good days and bad days, but the important thing was not to give up. And every time I thought about turning back, I remembered Marcelo's voice calling me useless. That gave me the strength to keep going. One of the hardest things was dealing with the guilt that remained. Not the guilt of leaving that house, but the guilt of leaving my mother behind. I still thought about her every day, even knowing she'd let me suffer, even remembering her recording my suffering, as if it were a clinical case. She was my mother, the woman who held me in her arms, who sang me to sleep when I was little, the Isabel who disappeared over time. I tried to understand, I tried to convince myself that she was trapped in a cycle, that she was a victim too. But part of me wanted to scream at her, ask how she could do it. I wanted to text her, but I always deleted it before sending it. My therapist said these conflicting feelings were normal, that affection and anger could coexist, and that perhaps forgiveness would come one day, but that I didn't need to force it. But sometimes I dreamed of her hugging me and apologizing. I'd wake up with my face wet from tears, and it would take hours to recover. The wound was still raw, but at least now I knew where it hurt. The lawsuit, though frustrating, had a symbolic effect. Even with the ridiculous settlement, Marcelo's name was tarnished. He was no longer untouchable. He lost respect in some circles and was removed. From some partnerships, Tiago and Lucas were transferred schools. I was told they began repeating their father's aggressive pattern, hitting classmates, and that made my heart ache, because deep down, I knew they were also trapped in that cycle. I never spoke to them again, nor do I want to, but I hope one day they'll have the chance to escape it too. As for Jorge, he became more than an uncle. He became my role model, a man who stood up to everything and everyone to get me out of this mess. He had no obligation to do what he did, but he did, and I know he paid the price too. Marcelo tried to undermine him at work, threatened him, spread lies, but Jorge stood firm. He always said, "Better to lose a contract than to lose a nephew." And it's because of him that I'm here today, writing this, because he showed me that there are people who choose the right thing, even when it's hard work. One day I sat with Jorge on his porch and asked him if he thought I could truly move on. He looked at me with that calmness he always has and said, "You're already moving on. You just haven't realized it yet." That shook me, because I was always waiting for a clear sign, a turning point, like in the movies. But it wasn't like that. It was one step at a time. A day when I could sleep without nightmares, a class where I could pay attention, a sincere smile, a moment when I didn't feel angry. That was moving on. I started making plans. Nothing big, but thinking about maybe working, maybe studying, psychology, or helping other young people who had been through what I had. That was new, because before, I only thought about surviving. Today I think about living. It's not always easy. There are days when the pain comes back with a vengeance, when the memory paralyzes me. But now I have tools, and I have people, and I have myself, and that's more than I ever thought I would have. I decided to write this story because I know so many people are going through similar things, and sometimes we feel like we're alone, that no one will understand, that no one will believe us. I felt the same way, and I almost gave up. If I hadn't sent that message to my uncle that night, maybe I'd still be there, or worse. So if you're reading this and feel like you can't take it anymore, talk to someone. Even if it's just one message, even if it's just an "I can't take it anymore." Because sometimes that's all we need to start changing. It's not easy. It will hurt. It will leave you in pieces. But you'll pick up the pieces, one by one. And when you look back, you'll see that you survived. And that in itself is a huge victory. I'm not a hero. I'm not an example of anything. But I am someone who lived through hell and made it out. I still have scars. I still have bad days. But now I know I'm stronger than I seemed. And no one can take that away from me. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see a kid who's been through too much for his age. But I also see someone who didn't let himself be destroyed, someone who was beaten, humiliated, ignored by his own mother, but who still hasn't lost his will to exist. I don't have all the answers. I'm still discovering myself, but I know I deserve peace. I know I deserve respect. I know I deserve love, and that starts with me. It starts when I look at myself with care, with patience, when I don't pressure myself to be okay all the time, when I understand that healing is a process, not a destination, and that it's okay to still hurt as long as I keep moving forward. That moldy room, that flashlight in my face, that empty plate, all of that is behind me, and I'm building a new future, one step at a time. And if you've made it this far, reading my story, I hope you take this with you. No one deserves to live in fear, and there's always a way out. Sometimes it starts with a silent scream, but it exists, and it's worth fighting for. Sometime later, I joined a social project that serves vulnerable youth. At first, I was a beneficiary, but after a while, I became a volunteer. There, I met people who had been through even more difficult stories than mine, and I realized how important it is for us to have a voice. Telling my story to these boys helped me more than any therapy, because when I said, "I understand you," I meant it. When I saw that mix of fear, anger, and despair in their eyes, it was as if I were looking at myself at 13 or 14 years old. And each time one of them managed to leave the house, ask for help, protect themselves, I felt a little bit of my pain made sense, that it wasn't in vain. I don't want to romanticize suffering because no one deserves to go through it, but transforming pain into strength, into a tool, was what saved me. Today, I don't want revenge. I don't want to see Marcelo arrested or humiliated. I just want distance, and I want to continue living with dignity, with truth, and helping those who still haven't managed to get out of the hole I've been in for so long. My relationship with my mother is still an open question. After the trial, she tried to get in touch a few times. She sent messages saying she missed me, that things were different, but there was never a clear apology. She always came up with excuses, that she didn't know how to act, that she thought it was the best way to raise me, that she couldn't go against Marcelo because she was afraid of losing her job. And I understand that she was afraid, but I was her son, and she left me in the hands of a cruel man. I still can't forgive. Maybe someday, maybe never, and that's okay. We shouldn't have to maintain ties just because there's blood involved. True family is the one who chooses to stand by us when everything falls apart. And she didn't. So, as much as it hurts, today I choose to keep my distance, at least until I'm whole enough to decide if I want to rebuild something. For now, I'm rebuilding myself, and that already takes time, energy, and more courage than anything else I've ever done. Leaving that house was like leaving a captivity not everyone saw, because psychological abuse doesn't leave visible bruises, it doesn't bleed in front of others, it's silence, it's staring at the ground, it's avoiding questions. I lived like that for years, and when I left, the world seemed too noisy, too free. It was even hard to believe. It took me months to understand that I could leave and come back from school without having to answer, that I could sleep until my body was tired, that I could eat without earning it. Today, when I see people normalizing certain abusive behaviors as strict upbringing or firm discipline, it makes my stomach churn, because that's how Marcelo hid for so long. Behind the rhetoric of a hard-working man, a war hero, a stern father, and many people preferred to believe that rather than truly look at what was happening inside that house. But today, I no longer remain silent. When I hear someone say that a child needs punishment to learn, I speak up, because I know what it's like to grow up thinking pain is normal. And it's not. It can't be. No child should have to survive their own home. The feeling of freedom still catches me by surprise sometimes, like when I'm walking down the street and realize I'm not afraid to go home, or when someone hugs me and I don't tense up, waiting for it to turn violent. The body holds everything, and mine is still learning that it's safe, that it can trust, that it doesn't need to shrink anymore. This takes time, and it requires patience, especially with myself. I've had relapses. I've blamed myself for not being well, for still dreaming about all that. But little by little, I learned that healing isn't erasing the past. It's learning to live with it without it dominating me. Today, I look at my internal scars with respect. They tell a story that almost no one sees, but which is mine. And if someone ever asks me how I survived, I'll say, with help, with courage, and with a lot of anger transformed into strength. Because anger kept me alive when everything around me seemed to want to destroy me. And now, that same anger pushes me forward to live my life my way without bowing my head to anyone. I remember one time, early on in my departure, I was in Jorge's kitchen washing dishes, and he came up behind me, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You're safe." I froze, because no one had ever said that to me before. Safe. The word echoed in my head for days. It was as if I'd spent years trapped in a windowless room, and suddenly someone opened the door and said, "You can come out." At first, I didn't even know what to do with this freedom. I felt guilty for being safe, as if I didn't deserve it. But little by little, I began to understand that I did, that everyone deserves to feel safe, loved, respected, and that wanting this isn't spoiled, it's basic. Today, this word continues to guide me. Safe. It's how I want to feel, and how I want those around me to feel too. That's why I carefully choose the people I let into my life now, because after everything I've been through, I've learned that not every hug is affection, and not every family is protection. Many people ask me if I still think about Marcelo, and the truth is, I do. Not every day, but sometimes he appears in my thoughts, in my memories, in my triggers, but not with the same power as before. Today, he's just a dark part of my past, someone who tried to destroy me, but failed. I've dreamed of him apologizing. I've dreamed of him laughing in my face, and I've dreamed of him disappearing forever. I think my brain is still trying to untangle this knot, but I don't live with that anymore. I don't expect him to regret it or to pay for what he did. I just want him to stay away, that's all. He doesn't define me, and as much as he left deep scars, I am more than that. I am the boy who resisted, who fought, who survived, and that's enough for me. Sometimes the best answer is to live well, to live truthfully, and that's what I've been doing, one step at a time, and each step is a victory he can never take from me. Going back to school was one of the biggest challenges. I was afraid of being too far behind, of not being able to keep up, of being judged. But when I realized I was learning, that I could understand the material, I felt strong, as if my brain was working again after so long numbed by fear. I had teachers who made a difference, who looked at me with respect, who believed in me. And that made all the difference, because when someone believes, we start to believe too. Today I'm in high school, with plans to go to college. I want to study psychology. I want to understand how the mind works, how trauma affects us, how to help those who have no voice. I want to be the adult I needed when I was a child, and that drives me. It's not to prove anything to anyone, it's for me, because I deserve to have dreams. I deserve to have a future. I've wasted too many years living in fear. Now I want to live with purpose. I want to show the boy I was that it was worth resisting, that he didn't put up with everything for nothing, that now I'm in charge of my life. If you've read this far, thank you. Truly, telling this story hurts, but it also liberates. And if it reaches even one person going through something similar, it's worth it. I wish I'd read something like this when I was at rock bottom. I wish I'd seen that it was possible to get out, that there was another side. So if you're that person now, if you're living in fear, being screamed at every day, being humiliated by someone who should protect you, don't think you deserve this. You don't. And you're not weak for crying, for despairing, for thinking about giving up. Just holding on is proof of your strength. And if you can, scream, write, text someone, seek help, because you deserve more. You deserve to live. You deserve to breathe in peace, and you will succeed, even if it seems impossible. Now, I'm proof of that. I, the boy who slept with clothes on for fear of being woken by screams, today I sleep in peace. Not every night, but many of them. And that, for me, is miracle enough. I had a final conversation with Nusa that had a profound impact on me. She came to visit me months later, sitting beside me with that calm, firm demeanor she always had. She told me I needed to allow myself to be happy, not just survive. Those words stuck with me. Until then, I'd only known how to fight, resist, endure. Being happy seemed like something otherworldly, a luxury that didn't fit into my reality. But at that moment, I realized it might be time to change that. I started allowing myself small moments of joy, a pizza with friends, a pair of headphones blasting music, a fearless nap, simple things that reminded me that life can be easy too. I'm not healed from everything, and I may never be 100%, but I've understood that doesn't stop me from moving forward. Trauma doesn't have to be the end of the story. Today, I'm writing my next pages with more calm, more choice, more truth. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that freedom doesn't begin when the door opens, but when we give ourselves the right to walk, even with trembling legs. This story isn't a gift-wrapped happy ending. It's just a piece of my truth thrown in here, hoping to reach someone going through something similar. I know how hard it is to believe there's life on the other side of pain, but it does. And it doesn't come ready-made. We build it with every choice, every step, every broken silence. Don't wait for others to save you. Sometimes help comes, but sometimes it doesn't. And even then, you can still get through this. I was a boy who slept 4 hours a night, afraid to breathe loudly. Today I sleep soundly, not because everything is over, but because I've taken back what was mine, my body, my voice, my story. I hope this text serves as a sign, like a dim light at the end of the tunnel for someone. If you're in this tunnel right now, hold on tight. Even if it's slow, even if no one understands, keep walking, because eventually the door will open, and when it does, you'll know you found the key.